Hey guys, it's Alexander Williamson here with The Secret History Living in Your Aquarium. Today we're going to be talking about 10 myths and misconceptions that are harmful to the hobby. So, when fish keeping, you may be a seasoned expert and we may have been told something long ago and it works well enough for us, or maybe you do enough right things that the fact that a couple things aren't optimal has worked well enough for you all this time. But now the science has shown that there's something better. Likewise, maybe someone with all the latest science tips and tricks that they've read online doesn't have the experience of someone who's been keeping fish for 50 years or whatnot. So in this video, we're going to go over the 10 most detrimental or harmful commonalities or common thoughts in the hobby that I often hear online or in other videos, and what we can do to set them right. So we're going to get into the top 10, but if you could do me a favor and in the comments write any of these that you don't agree with, you can kind of maybe state your case on why you disagree. Or more importantly, I'd love it if you wrote some of the ones that I missed, because I'm sure there's plenty I missed. I've picked 10 that I feel are important, and I'd love to hear more, because this is all about making the hobby more accessible to people and to make it more fun, more healthy, and more interesting for all of us, including our fishy friends. So let's get in at number 10. Here we go. Coming in at myth number 10, we have snails are bad for your plants. Nothing could be further from the truth. Here we have a nearite snail, and what I have these for is eating blackbeard algae. They can only have babies in salt water, so even though they have a cool pattern, I know that they're not going to reproduce in my tank, and they eat all sorts of other algae as well. Down here, I have a ram's horn snail. Now these can multiply, but as long as you don't overfeed your fish, it shouldn't be a problem. These guys just eat algae off the leaves, and what they'll do is they'll go ahead and eat dead plant matter. The same is true for many other snails. Malaysian trumpet snails, which have a long body, they actually upturn and distribute your substrate so that you don't get pockets that are dead, that don't have all the right nutrients, or that don't have oxygen in them. There's only a few snails, such as the apple snail family, and a few other ones that aren't really in the hobby, but they're out in the wild that sometimes get brought in, that will eat your plants. Most of what you'll find in any store is going to be perfectly safe for your plants. And when you think that perhaps, oh, that snail is eating my leaf, what might be going on is that you bought a plant that was immersed, like this sword plant. And instead of it eating a live and healthy leaf, it's eating a leaf that has melted. And so it's actually breaking down that ammonia, those nitrites and nitrate that get released from the leaves, and it's actually using it as food and fuel. And then the snail's waste product can be used. Those nitrites and nitrates are put into little pellets that can be used again by your plants. So they're a great help for your aquarium. And there are many types to choose from with lots and lots of colors. Number nine, our next myth is that bettas need to live alone. Well, it's just not the case. Bettas are actually an awesome fish for a big planted tank. If you can break up the sight lines, they're actually quite a peaceful fish. They kind of like to hide, they like to go into the corners, and they like to make little bubble nests at the top. Now granted, you don't want to put a bunch of males together, but you can happily keep groups of 3 or 4, 5 even, females together in an all betta tank, or you can keep several females in a all fish type community tank, or you can even, in a big enough tank, keep males and females. This 40 breeder has a couple males and a couple females living in it. They just need plenty of room, and they need to stay out of each other's hair. Other than that, they actually should do pretty well. If they start fighting and causing problems, you can always take them out and put them on their own. But just remember, go light on the males, and you can go a little heavier with the female population. We call that a sorority. Next up on our list is vacation feeding. This is the notion that you're going out of town for 4 or 5 days, and you're worried about all your fish. Maybe you have a couple tanks, and you're just worried that they're not going to get enough food. Who's going to feed these little guys? Well, turns out that your fish are completely fine for up to a week, at least a week. Now, many people know their fish, and they know that 2 weeks is fine. However, as someone who doesn't know your tank, I'm going to say that 99% of fish we keep in the aquarium hobby, if fed properly beforehand, will do completely fine without a week of fish food. Now, all you have to do is feed them a full belly before you leave, and I don't mean overfeed. That's just whatever they can eat in about 2 to 3 minutes left at the top of the tank for all of them to eat. And if you have any special fish that need to eat, algae wafers or something, count their time differently. Start it when they start grazing. But the number one way to mess up a good vacation is to come back and find somebody's overfed your fish, spiked your ammonia, one died, it hid somewhere, then it rotted, that super spiked your ammonia, and all of a sudden, halfway through your trip, you get a phone call that half your fish are dead. By the time you're back, since the person taking care of them doesn't know what happened, all your fish are dead. And you've got a sad friend, and you're sad about your fish. So, forget about all the vacation feeders and tabs. For the vast majority of people and the vast majority of fish, just let them be if it's less than a week. Coming in at number 7, we have gas from your substrate. Now, a lot of people have talked about this. They say if you're getting a buildup of cyanobacteria or little pockets in your substrate, that you need to quickly break that up, because little gas bubbles will come out of it, they'll come up into your tank, they'll diffuse, and they'll kill all your fish. Well, it turns out, after lots of research, we don't think that's the case. Not only that, but we have very little to no evidence to show that this has happened. A lot of people have misattributed it to them. And sulfur is a natural byproduct, specifically sulfur or hydrogen sulfide are the natural byproducts of things decomposing, things turning back into plant food and soil. So don't worry about it. Don't worry about your substrate stratifying for that reason, and just keep doing what you're doing. If you're worried that something's split up, get yourself some of those snails we were talking about. Malaysian trumpet snails will do just fine. They'll dig into your substrate and they'll break up all those little pockets of methane, nitrogen, oxygen, or sulfur gas. This brings us to number 6, gravel vacuing. You should always gravel vac your tank and make sure to get up all that debris. Gravel vac it deep. Do not do this. If you're going to gravel vac your tank, just run it along the top. What you're trying to do is get all the top debris. You see this stuff that comes up here? That's all you need to get. Whatever comes up into the tube without much effort. Your substrate, if done properly, and if you have a planted tank, should actually be working like a natural root tab. It will take in the things that die down there, the plant pieces and all the poop from the shrimp and the fish in your planted tank, and it will turn it into this little brown layer in between. See that under the soil and in between the sand and between the next gravel layer? Well, that's fertilizer. That's top-notch grade A fertilizer. So this is true if you have a planted tank and it's got substrate in a layered fashion. Now if you didn't have that, then you have something like this. Maybe you have just gravel or just sand, in which case you can gravel vac because there is no biological filter. There are no root tabifications going on in your substrate here. Just be sure that when you do that, that you're not gravel vacuuming up any little critters, and make sure that you've got a really good sponge filter on there or a corner filter. Otherwise, you don't have much filtration going on in your tank. Your substrate can actually filter a whole lot more than you think it can, and that's by layering it. Check out the Wallstead method. The next myth, number 6, is probably one you've heard, and that is you should have an inch of fish per gallon of water. Well, let me tell you something. I've got an inch of fish in each of these little panda loaches in a 10-gallon tank. There are 10 of them. Would you say that that is full? I would not. Let's take another look. Up here, we've got an inch of fish in a 20-gallon tank. And would you say that these are about an inch long? Maybe an inch and a half. Well, there's at least 20 or 30 fish in there, and I think they have plenty of room. Well, let's take a look at this other tank again. Well, in here predominantly, we've got a couple bettas and some angelfish and some tetras. But the bettas, they're maybe an inch and a half each. Tetras are not even an inch. So let's say we have about 10 inches of other fish, and each of these fish is about 3 to 4 inches long. Well, now you see where the problem is. These angelfish, especially when you look at how wide they are, I mean, they're slender fish, but they're still much wider than those little pandagarras we had. And every fish has a different metabolism and a different diet. For instance, 1 inch of goldfish is completely different than 1 inch of lipstick goby. A lipstick goby is going to eat food that has a lot less ammonia in it and a lot less protein in it, generally speaking. Whereas a goldfish will eat anything, and they don't digest things very thoroughly. Plus, they actually have a biofilm that can be slightly harmful to other fish if in concentrated amounts of water. This is also true for things like Corydoras. They have the ability to actually put venom into the water when scared. Not that this is a major problem going around with Corydoras squirting venom in the water, but it is something to think about. All the little differences in our fish, and the fact that a fish that's 3 inches long is almost always going to equal more than 3 inches of 3-inch long fish. It's just how their bodies are. Think of an Oscar or a big cichlid or a bala shark. Whatever it may be, they're going to be bigger than just their body length indicates. That's also width and height too. So it really should be cubic, liters or cubic milliliters or grams of fish. But there's no easy way to do that. So just use common sense and try to think that that's about 10 inches in a tank that isn't planted and that has proper filtration as per what the market states. But you can fit a whole lot more fish if they're nano fish and in a planted tank than if it is a non-planted tank with a glass bottom and say big old goldfish and a sponge filter. So remember that when you're planning your next aquarium. Alright, at number 5 we have that small fish tanks are just easier than big ones. Well, here we have a rice fish in an actual fish bowl. One of the few fish that I even recommend keeping in a fish bowl. I would not put goldfish in there, and I would not put most fish in there. However, back to the big angel tank, and we can see that this tank has room for plants. It has room for 2 filters, and it has room for 2 lights. All of its systems have backup, and the more water you have, the longer it takes for that water to be affected. So if these fish are creating ammonia by simply going to the bathroom, it's a very slow process. Whereas in a small body of water, those fish can actually make that ammonia go up quite a bit quicker. But even worse, if one of those fish dies suddenly and the ammonia skyrockets to a dangerous level from your 3 fish in a fishbowl, you could have, you know, a fish the size of one of the mollies or platies that are in here die, and it probably wouldn't even put a dent in the ammonia in the tank, because we have so many plants and 2 mechanical filters and biological filters set up, plus the substrate is layered and acts as another filter. These reasons and more, which you can check out on my channel, is why an active substrate and planted tanks are great and make your fish tank safer for your fish, easier to control the parameters of, and they're easier to take care of in the long haul. Number 3, your fish won't outgrow their tank. They'll stay the size of their tank and it'll be fine. Wrong. Just wrong. I feel like I shouldn't have to explain this one. However, even if the fish does stay limited to the size of its tank, its organs will become compressed and it will often die a very unhealthy, slow, and painful death. Beyond that, you need to think about the fish's entire life. When I got these 4 angelfish, I knew they needed almost this entire 40 gallons, and I planned accordingly. So, no, fish will not stay the same size as the container you put them in. Do not put a red-tailed shark that's $8.99 at Petco in a beta bowl. Please. Number 2, our next little myth here is that whenever you get new fish, you must quarantine them and medicate them while quarantining them. So I cannot argue with the fact that you may want to quarantine your fish no matter where you get them. Even if your best friend gives you a fish, their water could be different. They could have parasites or bacteria that your fish just aren't used to and that they need to get used to. So you might need to give them time to acclimate and not be stressed. However, even if it's nothing wrong with your friend's tank or the water or anything like that, and your fish are fine, it's always good to observe them so you know that the fish was in good shape when you got it. You can see here that if I was just watching this fish now, I would think that he's being odd turning on his side. However, I know that he's under a plant and he's just being odd because he's under a plant. But I have people sending me videos constantly saying, my fish is kind of tilted funny, or he's swimming right at the top of the water or at the bottom. And quarantine gives you time to figure out what your fish is all about, what it's doing, and lets you familiarize yourself with that fish when it's alone or just with fish of its same type. Now, if you get a whole bunch of fish that were all in the same body of water, or they're going into a tank with no other fish already in it, then you can treat that tank as a quarantine tank if they're all staying in the same water. However, I do not recommend that people treat their fish with medication unless they notice something specifically wrong, or that fish is a wild-caught fish, in which case I would recommend giving it some antifungal and antiparasitic meds, just in case it spreads them to your other fish that after, say, 10 to 14 days, on its own, you may not notice anything on your quarantined fish, but it could be something that could be spread to your other fish. So that's why you may want to medicate in that case. However, if you're just going to the store and getting fish from a farm source or from a breeder nearby, I do not recommend medicating until you see something wrong. Most serious parasites, most serious bacterial infections, and all sorts of other issues will show up if you know what you're looking for. And treating them really stresses them out. Just giving them one of every drug, how would you feel if you had one of every drug? Especially when the side effects sound like one of those drug commercials on TV these days. Side effects may include sneezing, bleeding, and death. So just think about how you quarantine. That's the bottom line with this one. It's not totally true or false, and I don't have an answer for every situation. Coming in at number 1, we have, you don't need to feed your plecos, they just eat algae. Well, whether it's a little pleco or coming around the corner, a big pleco, that is not always the case. In fact, it's not usually the case. You need to feed your plecos. Now, yes, they can eat algae and they can eat all sorts of things in your tank. Biofilm, blackbeard algae, that's that stuff on those leaves there that I had those nearite snails moved in here to eat. And yes, they will eat it. However, they don't eat other kinds of algae like this diatomaceous algae. And for that matter, they don't really like blackbeard algae. They will gnaw on it, but it's more for the biofilm. On top of all that, there's over 900 species of plecos. And these plecos, aka suckerfish, which you may think of as a black, brown, or leopard-spotted fish, come in many, many varieties, and they eat just as many things. So while some of them only eat algae, others only eat wood, others only eat meat. There's carnivorous ones. In fact, there's a lot of them. Whereas others will eat just about anything you throw in the tank. And that's somewhere between that and herbivores is usually where most of them fall. Most of them will eat most of what you put into your tank. They'll eat most fish food, fish flake, things like that, and they love algae wafers. But fresh vegetables are a great treat for nearly all plecos, including the carnivores. Even they like the vegetable skewers, like some nice blanched zucchini or fresh cucumber. Alright guys, well that's 10 of the myths that I think are prevalent in the hobby that get passed around, and a lot of even experienced people pass around some variation or version of those myths. I hope in this video I was able to dispel or at least enlighten your thoughts on some of those myths, and maybe you have some more you'd like to add to it. If you found this content interesting, please hit that like button. I'd appreciate it greatly. And if I've earned it, click that little bell with the notifications if you'd like to see future content and videos from me. I'll talk to you later. This has been Alex with The Secret History of Living Inside Your Aquarium. And look, the little plecos come out front. He says, leave a comment with your favorite myth.